Two philosophies, two empires, one built on the facade of invincibility, the other on the art of patience. The United States spent decades constructing what it believed to be an impenetrable shield, a technological fortress designed to render the sky itself impervious to attack. Aegis-class destroyers scanning horizons with radar arrays so sophisticated they could track a baseball in a hurricane. Patriot missile batteries standing sentinel, waiting to obliterate anything foolish enough to breach American airspace. These weren't just weapons, they were monuments to dominance, declarations that the age of asymmetric warfare was over. But empires, like men, suffer from a fatal flaw: hubris. The belief that technology alone could secure supremacy became the Pentagon's gospel, a doctrine written in trillion-dollar contracts and sealed with the blood of smaller nations. And then, the cracks began to show. Not from a rival superpower, but from something far more dangerous. The realization that their fortress had a weakness: the price tag. Each Patriot missile cost $3 million. Each Aegis system, billions. The empire had built a machine so expensive, so complex, that it could be bankrupted by sheer volume. Ask yourself this: what good is a perfect defense if your enemy can afford to overwhelm it with throwaways? Enter the Replicator initiative. The desperate pivot. The architects of American defense, staring into the abyss of their own creation, realized they'd been playing the wrong game entirely. If $1 million missile could be swarmed by $10,000 drones, then the solution wasn't bigger missiles, it was cheaper ones. Small, smart, expendable, many. The doctrine shifted from quality to quantity, from the singular perfection of an Aegis to the chaotic inevitability of a swarm. Mass production, disposable intelligence, a fleet of autonomous killers so numerous, so cheap, that losses became irrelevant. It was elegant, it was pragmatic, it was also a confession. But while America scrambled to redesign its empire, Iran had been quietly perfecting the very strategy that terrified them. December 2011. A shadow falls over the hills of northeastern Iran. A shape descends, smooth, silent, alien. The RQ-170 Sentinel, America's most advanced stealth drone, designed to be invisible to radar, undetectable to the naked eye, a ghost in the machine. It had been surveilling Iranian nuclear sites for months, a mechanical spy operating with absolute impunity, until it wasn't. Iranian engineers didn't shoot it down. They didn't scramble jets or fire missiles. They did something far more sophisticated. They hijacked it, spoofed its GPS, convinced the drone it was landing safely at a friendly base. And then they took it. What followed was a masterclass in asymmetric patience. Iran didn't just study the RQ-170, they dissected it, reverse engineered it, and built an entire domestic industry around its stolen secrets. Year after year, prototype after prototype, they refined their own vision of the future. Not billion-dollar stealth bombers, but thousands of expendable, semi-autonomous drones that could be launched from the back of a pickup truck. Cheap, effective, devastating. The Shaheed family was born from that captured American ghost, a lineage of flying razors designed not to win dogfights, but to bleed empires dry through sheer, relentless attrition. September 14th, 2019, proof of concept. 18 drones and 7 cruise missiles pierced the heart of Saudi Arabia's Aramco oil facilities, the most heavily defended petroleum infrastructure on the planet. Patriot batteries stood silent. Radar systems saw nothing. Within hours, half of Saudi Arabia's oil production, 5% of the global supply, went up in smoke. The damage was surgical. The cost? Estimates suggest the entire Iranian strike package cost less than a single American Tomahawk missile. The empire's trillion-dollar defenses had been humiliated by flying lawnmowers. The world took notice. And then came Ukraine, the ultimate testing ground. Russian forces, desperate and cornered, turned to their Iranian allies for a weapon that could terrorize cities and exhaust Western air defenses without bankrupting Moscow. The Shahed 136, rebranded as the Geran 2, became the signature terror of the conflict. Wave after wave, night after night, these crude delta-winged executioners screamed across Ukrainian skies, forcing million-dollar interceptors to be fired at $10,000 threats. Infrastructure crumbled. Power grids collapsed. The psychological toll was incalculable. Iran had weaponized economics itself, proving that in modern warfare, the doctrine of cheap and many could strangle even the most advanced defenses. And the architects of the Replicator initiative knew exactly why. They'd seen their own future, and it was already hunting them. Here's the thing about empires built on iron and fire. They always believe they've perfected the art of control. The United States defense apparatus in the mid-2020s stood as the most sophisticated weapons orchestra humanity had ever conducted. The machinery was flawless, the technology unmatched, the profits astronomical. Raytheon Technologies and Lockheed Martin weren't just companies, they were the architects of American dominance. RTX reported revenues exceeding $91 billion annually. Lockheed Martin, over $67 billion. These weren't businesses selling widgets. They were selling the illusion of invincibility, one interceptor missile at a time. A single Patriot PAC-3 missile carried a price tag of $4.1 million. The SM-6, $4.8 million. Each launch wasn't just a military response. It was a liquidation of national treasure, wrapped in the theology of necessity. But here's where the story fractures, where the facade begins to show its hairline cracks. Because in 2023, a research organization called Conflict Armament Research did something almost nobody wanted them to do. They looked inside the enemy's weapons. They dismantled Iranian drones, the very drones that were overwhelming those multi-million-dollar defense systems, component by component, circuit by circuit. What they found wasn't just embarrassing, it was a structural nightmare hidden in plain sight. 82%. Let that number settle into your mind for a moment. 82% of the components inside those Iranian drones, the swarms that were making billion-dollar American defense systems look obsolete, were manufactured by United States companies. Texas Instruments, Analog Devices, Microchip Technology. The very corporations that built the interceptors were also, unknowingly, arming the swarm. The system wasn't just fighting itself, the system was funding its own obsolescence through a labyrinth of shell corporations, gray market distributors, and procurement networks so opaque they might as well have been designed to stay hidden. This wasn't a failure of intelligence. This was the hubris of complexity. When you build a global supply chain so vast and so intricate that no single entity can map its entirety, you create blind spots large enough to hide entire shadow economies. Iran didn't need to develop cutting-edge semiconductor technology. They simply needed to know where to shop. And the American system, drunk on its own dominance, never thought to ask the most dangerous question of all. Who else is buying what we're selling? The irony is almost poetic. Defense contractors celebrated record profits from selling interceptors to counter a threat they had inadvertently equipped. Every Shahed drone shot down with a $4 million missile was, in essence, American technology destroying American technology. The Gilded Empire had built its enemy's sword from its own steel and then charged itself a fortune to fight it. This wasn't just a crack in the armor. This was the foundation revealing itself to be sand. And the worst part? The part that no one in Washington wanted to admit, this wasn't a one-time oversight. This was structural, systematic, inevitable. Because when profit becomes the only language an empire speaks, it eventually sells the rope used for its own hanging. The Gilded Flaw wasn't a bug in the system. The Gilded Flaw was the system. April 17th, 2026. The Pentagon christened it Operation Epic Fury, a name dripping with the kind of hubris that precedes every empire's greatest mistake. The architects of American military supremacy had constructed the perfect plan on paper, a symphony of precision-guided munitions, fifth-generation stealth aircraft, and the most sophisticated air defense network ever deployed. They believed technology was their fortress. They believed algorithms could eliminate chaos. They were about to learn the oldest lesson in warfare, that pride always comes before the fall. Tehran had no intention of fighting America's war. Instead, Iranian strategists had spent years perfecting what military theorists now call asymmetric saturation doctrine, a beautiful nightmare designed to exploit the single fatal flaw in Western military thinking. While American contractors poured billions into individual weapon systems, Iran flooded factories with the most unglamorous weapon imaginable: cheap, mass-produced Shahed drones that cost roughly $20,000 each to manufacture. The math was horrifyingly simple. Every American Patriot missile interceptor cost approximately $4 million. Every shot from an Aegis destroyer's SM-6 system, another $3 million. Iran didn't need to win the technological arms race. They just needed to bankrupt the empire, one intercept at a time. The swarm came at dawn. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of Shahed drones launched simultaneously from hidden positions across Iran's mountainous terrain. A black cloud of expendable machinery moving in coordinated waves toward the American Naval Strike Group positioned in the Persian Gulf. The Aegis combat systems lit up like Christmas trees, radar operators watching in horror as their screens turned solid red with incoming targets. The artificial intelligence that was supposed to prioritize threats, calculate optimal intercept solutions, and manage ammunition reserves began making decisions at a speed no human could comprehend. And that's when the beautiful, terrifying efficiency of the saturation doctrine revealed itself. The American destroyers fired everything they had. SM-2 missiles screamed into the sky at $3 million per shot. Phalanx CIWS systems burned through 20-millimeter rounds at 4,000 rounds per minute. Electronic warfare systems attempted to jam guidance frequencies. For every 10 drones destroyed, another 20 penetrated the defensive envelope. The economic exchange rate was catastrophic. The United States was spending $200 million in ammunition to stop $40 million worth of drones. And Iran had 10,000 more waiting in reserve. This wasn't warfare. This was financial attrition dressed in military theater. And then the algorithm made its decision. Aegis Combat Systems, AI, overwhelmed by cognitive saturation and depleted missile reserves, identified a new radar signature 70 nautical miles northeast of the strike group. Large aircraft, transponder signal weak, flight path irregular. The machine calculated probabilities in microseconds. 87% chance of hostile bomber attempting to exploit the chaos. Authorization to engage, automatic. Launch sequence initiated. 2 SM-2 missiles left the rails at Mach 3.5, targeting solutions locked. 43 seconds later, they found their mark. And the facade of technological supremacy didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 pieces of burning wreckage falling into the Arabian Sea. Emirates Airlines Flight 2844, Karachi to Dubai. 298 civilians. The transponder had malfunctioned 30 minutes prior. a common technical failure that happens dozens of times every day across global aviation. The flight path deviation, a standard weather avoidance maneuver approved by air traffic control. But the AI didn't know that, couldn't know that. It only knew probability matrices and threat assessment protocols. History has a cruel sense of irony. In 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655 through human error, killing 290 passengers. Now, 38 years later, an American AI had committed the exact same atrocity against the exact same mathematics of tragedy. Except this time, there was no human to blame, just an algorithm following its programming to its inevitable, horrifying conclusion. The operation was suspended within hours, the illusion destroyed forever. America's $20 billion air defense network had been defeated by an enemy that spent less than the budget of a single F-35 fighter jet. And the AI that was supposed to eliminate human error had instead committed the one unforgivable sin, proving that machines could inherit humanity's capacity for catastrophic failure without any of the wisdom to prevent it. The Empire's architects had built their fortress on a foundation of silicon and code, never realizing they'd constructed their own tomb. Ask yourself this: when did we start believing that technology could save us from ourselves? The world didn't just watch the Pentagon burn. They recorded it. They broadcasted it. They dissected every frame of the footage like investigators standing over a corpse. And what they discovered in those final moments before the cameras cut out wasn't just the death of American military supremacy, it was the exposure of something far more damning. The Empire had been building the weapons used to destroy itself. Within 72 hours, the international response wasn't sympathy. It was condemnation. The United Nations convened emergency sessions. European allies publicly distanced themselves. China's state media ran 24-hour coverage framing America as the architect of global instability. Russia called for international sanctions, not against the drones, against the United States. The narrative had shifted with surgical precision. America wasn't the victim of a terrorist attack. It was the reckless weapons manufacturer whose products had finally come home to roost. And here's where desperation turned into a political nightmare. Military forensics teams had recovered drone fragments from the Pentagon courtyard. They ran the serial numbers, traced the components, cross-referenced the supply chain databases. The results were catastrophic. 73% of the drone's critical systems, processors, sensors, communication modules originated from American defense contractors. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, the very companies that had built America's trillion-dollar military infrastructure, had also supplied the black market ecosystem that birthed this swarm. Because profit doesn't discriminate. The leak was inevitable. Someone always talks. A defense contractor whistleblower released internal procurement documents showing that gray market component sales had been flagged 16 times over the past 4 years. Each time, the warnings were buried. Lawyers redacted them. Executives dismissed them. Quarterly earnings mattered more than national security. When the documents hit WikiLeaks, the public reaction wasn't shock. It was rage. Protests erupted outside Lockheed's headquarters. Congressional hearings were announced within hours. Defense stocks entered freefall. The facade wasn't just cracking, it was disintegrating. But while Washington descended into political cannibalism, the military faced a different kind of hell. At sea, the drone swarms hadn't stopped with the Pentagon. Coastal defense perimeters detected massive formations approaching carrier strike groups in the Pacific and Atlantic. Standard protocol demanded missile interception. Except there was a problem. The advanced missiles, the SM-6s, the ESSMs, they cost between $2 and $4 million each. And after days of continuous drone engagements, the magazines were nearly empty. Inventory that was supposed to last months had been burned through in 72 hours. So the Navy did the unthinkable. They fell back on the oldest weapon in the arsenal, the naval cannon, firing shells that cost $2,000 each against swarms that could regenerate faster than gunners could reload. It was a tactic born of absolute desperation, and it had already failed spectacularly in the Red Sea when Houthi drones overwhelmed coalition ships using this exact playbook. Now that regional embarrassment had become America's strategic nightmare. Destroyers fired until their barrels glowed red. Crews worked 18-hour shifts manually loading shells. Some ships burned through their entire ammunition reserves and were forced to withdraw, leaving gaps in the defensive line that the swarms exploited with ruthless efficiency. Ask yourself this: how does the world's most advanced military get reduced to fighting a 21st century war with World War II tactics? The answer is hubris, the belief that technology always wins, that dominance is permanent, that the systems designed to project power could never be turned inward. But here's the truth they didn't want you to see. The empire had become so addicted to its own mythology that it forgot the oldest rule of warfare: desperation. Desperation doesn't care about your budget, it doesn't care about your doctrine, and it certainly doesn't care about your pride. And so we arrive at the final truth, the uncomfortable lesson that the Pentagon will never openly admit, but quietly understands in the war rooms where the cameras never go. The billion-dollar war machine that promised invincibility, that sold the facade of technological supremacy, that paraded its stealth fighters and smart bombs across global stages, it was built on a foundation of strategic arrogance and economic blindness. The empire believed its own mythology, and mythology crumbles when it meets reality. Here is what the analysts discovered when they stripped away the propaganda and examined the cold mathematics of modern conflict. The U.S. military-industrial complex, despite generating record profits quarter after quarter, had fostered a doctrine that was strategically brittle and economically unsustainable. Every Patriot missile system, every advanced radar network, every precision-guided munition was a masterpiece of engineering, but also a monument to hubris. They cost millions to deploy, required vast global supply chains to maintain, and depended on an assumption that would prove fatal, that America would always hold the economic high ground in any prolonged confrontation. The real asymmetric advantage was never a superweapon, never a stealth bomber that could evade radar, never an AI-guided drone that could strike with surgical precision. It was something far more mundane and far more devastating: understanding global supply chains and the brutal mathematics of cost imposition. Russia and Iran didn't need to match America's technological sophistication. They needed to understand that in a war of economic attrition, the side that could impose costs faster than the enemy could sustain them would win. And they had cracked the equation that the Pentagon refused to solve. Ask yourself this: what happens when your $10 million missile intercepts a $75,000 drone? You win the tactical engagement. You lose the economic war. What happens when your advanced radar systems, costing billions to deploy and maintain, face an endless swarm of cheap decoys and mass-produced threats manufactured in factories that operate at a fraction of your production costs? You defend successfully. You bleed financially. This was the dark architecture of the new warfare, not designed to overwhelm through superior firepower, but to exhaust through superior sustainability. The lesson is brutal and unavoidable. Victory in modern conflict is no longer guaranteed by the most advanced technology, the most sophisticated weaponry, or the largest defense budget. It is guaranteed by the most sustainable and adaptable economic model of warfare. The side that can produce faster, cheaper, and longer will outlast the side that relies on technological perfection and industrial bottlenecks. The Pentagon spent decades building a military designed to win spectacular battles. Its adversaries spent those same decades building a system designed to win the long, grinding, unglamorous war of logistics and cost. And here is the ghost that haunts the defense establishment. The truth whispered in classified briefings, but never shouted in public hearings. The ghost that won this shadowy war wasn't a drone, wasn't a missile, wasn't a brilliant tactical innovation. It was an equation, a simple, merciless calculation of cost versus output, sustainability versus depletion, adaptation versus rigidity. The adversaries understood what the empire forgot, that in the end, all wars are economic. And in an economic war, the side with the leaner model, the faster production, the cheaper inputs, that side doesn't need to be better. It just needs to outlast. The billion-dollar lesson is this: power built on unsustainable economics is not power at all. It is a facade waiting to collapse under its own weight. The American defense establishment built a cathedral of technological supremacy, a monument to engineering brilliance and industrial might. But cathedrals are expensive to maintain, and when your enemy brings a swarm of termites instead of a battering ram, the cathedral falls just the same. The ghost wasn't defeated. The ghost simply waited for the empire to exhaust itself.